Hi, and thanks for joining us for this free YouTube version of our health and safety training course, which is also available in full with certificates over at safeti.com. If you find our content useful here in this format on YouTube, please hit that like button and leave us a comment if you like and let us know what you found useful. By doing that, you'll help more people discover our channel here, and not only that, it'll encourage us to upload even more free resources just like this here on our YouTube channel. So thanks a million in advance for that. Okay, let's waste no more time. We're ready to get started with our health and safety training. Welcome to this short Abrasive Wheels awareness course, where we aim to give you a basic understanding of what abrasive wheels are, the key risks involved with using them, and we'll cover the important information and procedures that should be in place to make sure you can carry out your work safely. Please note, whilst this online course is highly valuable when it comes to health and safety awareness for abrasive wheels, it doesn't take the place and shouldn't substitute thorough practical training that should be implemented and appropriate for the type of abrasive wheels and equipment that you're using. Let's get started with our first chapter, which asks, what are abrasive wheels? When we talk about abrasive wheels, what exactly are we referring to? The term abrasive wheel actually encompasses a range of powered equipment, including discs, cylinders, belts, or points that are coated with abrasive particles. They come in an array of different types and are usually constructed to be applied in specific ways. This includes cutting, shaping, removing sharp edges, or simply cleaning or prepping material for further work. There are some other elements for each wheel that may vary depending on the product. Let's look at some of those characteristics. First of all, and perhaps most importantly, we have the abrasive itself, which of course allows the wheel to do its job. The most common of these that you'll come across is aluminium oxide. However, there are many others, and that includes industrial grade synthetic diamonds. The next important aspect is grain or particle size, similar to what we would find if we're selecting sandpaper, for example. It goes without saying that you'll want to make sure when you're selecting the grain size that it's appropriate for the application for which you intend to use it. The next element to consider with your abrasive wheel is the grade of the material. In other words, the tenacity or strength of how the bonded material holds together your abrasive particles. In other words, how hard is it to break it down? Your product may be graded in terms of this strength and represented by an alphabetical scale starting from the most soft at A right through to the toughest of those bonded materials at Z. Abrasive wheels can be used on a vast array of different materials, including wood, brick, stone and metal, of course. We'll talk in a little bit more detail about the characteristics of these products a bit later in the course. When you look at an abrasive wheel in operation, is there anything that jumps out to you as a potential hazard which could cause harm? Well, unfortunately, there are various direct injuries that often happen as a result of using abrasive wheels, and these include crushing of the hands and fingers, severe friction burns to the skin, and serious damage to the eyes. Can you think of how these injuries might happen? Let's take a look. The first one, which is probably the most obvious, is physical contact. Abrasive wheels normally spin or rotate at very high speeds, though this does vary depending on the wheel and the application. Needless to say, when you have a highly abrasive, robust material that's been engineered to cut through or wear down industrial materials, then it's not hard to imagine what that might do if it comes into contact with human skin. One of the characteristics that we mentioned earlier was the strength or tenacity of the wheel. If a wheel is old, badly maintained, or simply misused, then the risk of it breaking or bursting increases. If this happens, pieces of the material can be projected into the air at very high speeds, and if you're in the line of fire, it can cause you serious harm. As with many pieces of industrial equipment that turn or rotate, there is a significant risk of entanglement when using abrasive wheels. In other words, it can be easy to get clothing, hair, or jewellery caught in the machine or equipment, which will pull you into contact with it. It's not a nice thought, and again, it can lead to severe injury, so it's something to stay aware of. And finally, another significant risk factor that has the potential to affect everyone in the vicinity of the work taking place, and that is the risk of fire. The heat, sparks and dust that can be created from abrasive wheel use varies considerably depending on the application. And something that's really worth taking note of here is how that impacts the risk of fire in your workplace. For this reason, it's critical to consider your work setup when you're planning activity with abrasive wheels. And this includes the selection of an appropriate work area, the storage of combustible materials, dust extraction and ventilation, and other fire risk control measures. It's important to be thoughtful about these main aspects of personal injury risk when planning your work with abrasive wheels. Employers are obliged to look after the safety and well-being of their employees, and this of course includes things like doing risk assessments for their workplace activities. And yes, perhaps unsurprisingly, that does include the use of abrasive wheels. Just as a reminder as to what that risk assessment should entail, well, it has to consider the potential risks to any employees or other people that may be affected by the type of work that's taking place. It's up to employers to identify what suitable control measures need to be in place to minimise that risk of harm, and also to ensure they're implemented properly. Controls include making sure employees have the correct equipment for the job that they're doing, and also making sure that that equipment remains safe. It also includes ensuring that people are provided with appropriate personal protective equipment or PPE. And it's also worth noting, if you are an employer and you're managing employees or contractors, it's likely that you'll have responsibility to verify the competence and training of the individuals that you've selected to do the task. It's hopefully not a surprise for me to tell you that maintaining a safe place of work is not solely the responsibility of your employer. As an employee, it also rests on your shoulders. You have a responsibility to act properly and safeguard your own safety and that of others in the vicinity of your work. This may include following any safety or workplace procedures that you've been informed about, using any safety equipment or personal protective equipment that's been issued to you, visually inspecting tools or equipment before use, and reporting any issues to your line manager or other responsible person as promptly as you can. As we've already discussed, abrasive wheels are inherently at risk of bursting due to their nature. And so one of the key safety features of any abrasive wheel equipment or machinery should be adequate guarding. The purpose of such guarding is to reduce the risk or mitigate the impact of the material coming into contact with the operator or other people who may be affected in the area. And this includes acting as both an important physical barrier during normal operation of the equipment and in the event of wheel breakage or burst. Guarding does come in a range of different guises depending on the equipment that you're using. But the general rule of thumb is to ensure that there's always an appropriate guard in place for the protection of both you and those around you. It's also worth mentioning that you should never be tempted to remove or tamper with a guard, as it's been set up by the manufacturer, and if you do have to because it's impeding your work, speak to the appropriate person in your organisation to make sure what you're doing is safe. As we touched on earlier, sparks from grinding machines can combine with ignitable dust and oxygen to create a deadly combination, or just come into contact with combustible materials and create a serious fire hazard. Any risk assessment that is carried out on grinding or similar operations should take into consideration the risk of these explosive mixtures occurring in the air surrounding the work. In many cases, and in particular if ad hoc or contractor work is taking place, it will be both appropriate and beneficial to have some form of work permit system in place, such as hot work permits, to ensure that the correct control measures are implemented to reduce the risk of fire. A hot works permit is usually issued and authorised by the building or premises operator, or in the case of the construction industry, it may be issued by the main or principal contractor for the project. If you're planning on working with abrasive wheels, you should check if such a system is in place for the area that you're working in and find out who's responsible for issuing such a permit before your work can commence. There are a few other aspects when it comes to health and safety that you may need to consider when using abrasive wheels, and although we'll not cover each in depth in this course, we want to touch on a few of them just for your awareness. When using handheld tools of any type, you may be at risk of hand-arm vibration syndrome, and this includes many pieces of equipment that use abrasive wheels, including portable grinders. When the nerves and blood vessels are continually exposed to vibration over extended periods, it can result in a loss of function in your fingers or hands. Making sure that you have the correct equipment and wheel for the job, and to ensure that they're both in good working order, will help reduce the potential health impact from vibration exposure. Thanks again for visiting our channel. We really hope you found it valuable. Please hit that like button and do subscribe to the channel so we can let you know if we release new material. That really is a huge help for us. Not to forget, I will leave links to the full course version with certificates that's available at our website safeti.com, so you can use that for yourself, your team or your business, and we'll look forward to hearing your feedback on that. Until next time, take care.